Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Berger from Loy Instrument. I've been in the industry for about 28 years now. I had started my career with Honeywell Service as a service technician, and I always enjoy going through these type of presentations and talking about the technical specifications on the product and how they apply because I'm kind of a geek when it comes to that type of stuff. So bear with me as we go through this today. If you have any questions at the end, we can have a question and answer session as well. But with that, we'll get started here in the presentation. So today we're going to talk about the Honeywell Paperless Recorder software. A couple weeks ago, we went over the recorders themselves and went through the different styles of recorders that Honeywell has. Today, we're going to focus more on the software that allows you to upload, download configurations to the recorder, as well as gather data that you had recorded on the recorder for your process. So we'll start off with the real basics here on the recorders. Why do customers record data? We record data for a lot of different things. Most of the time it's because someone had asked us to record it. This can either be an agency like FDA, EPA, Boeing specs, other outside agencies. Customers demand a report of the process. So when we're building a part for a customer, we're heat treating a part for a customer, they tend to want to see that data from time to time. The other is internal approvals for quality or process managers within our businesses. They like to see that data as well when we're running a part to make sure that everything meets the quality standards as we're manufacturing the parts. Operator needs to know what's happening with the process. So, when we're running our process control, we want to make sure that the process variables are lining right out at set point, and we're doing a good job at controlling the process. So operators need to know what's going on with the process. Recorders are a great way for an operator to see what's going on with alarms, with events, with the set point, the process variable. So it's a great window into the application. Historical records, that goes without saying. A lot of times we'll need to pull up that data. It could be a year from now, 2 years from now. In some aerospace industries, it could be up to 15 to 20 years from now that we need to pull that data to take a look at what went on with the process when we were manufacturing or heat treating the part. Process improvements or a record of the process. This is always a nice thing to be able to look back at a particular run that you had in the application. Let's say it was a standard heat treat furnace where you were running a part, the part came out right to spec, and you want to be able to take a look at that run and see what all the dynamics were of the run so that you could duplicate it in future processes. So we tend to call those the golden batches. This is a batch of product that came out of the furnace just right on spec, and we'd like to see the proof of that process so that we can duplicate it in the future. Process improvements, certification purposes, check to ensure that the equipment is performing to specification. This is even more predominant in the aerospace industry, where customers are meeting the AMS 2750 spec, which they need to run temperature uniformity surveys, system accuracy tests on their furnaces, and the recorder is a great way to capture that data and provide that into a report. As I was saying a couple weeks ago, we talked about the recorders themselves. Here's just a brief recap on the different recorders that Honeywell offers. It starts with an EasyTrend GR recorder. This is really a introductory level recorder. It offers a 5.7-inch touch screen, color screen with 3 to 12 analog inputs with a resolution of 320 by 240. It serves a wide variety of applications where customers need to have a simple yet secure data recorder for the data that they're recording. We move up to the Minitrend GR recorder. This is still a 5.7-inch display, 4 to 16 analog inputs, offers a little bit better resolution at the 640 to 480, but it gives you a little bit better resolution, so if you have multiple inputs that's recording on the chart recorder, it's a little bit easier to see where those points are exactly at on the graph. Moving up to the Multitrend GR recorder, this is a 12-inch display. Again, still touch panel display, offers up to 48 analog inputs and 1024 by 768 resolution. Last but not least is the DR graphic recorder. This recorder is a replacement for the circular chart paper recorders that Honeywell has. You might have seen these widely used in wastewater treatment, flow applications, totalizer applications, but these are a direct replacement for the paper recorders that Honeywell's had for years. It emulates a circular chart. It's a 12.1-inch display, and you can have up to 16 analog inputs. Each one of these recorders is a universal analog input, so you can configure it for thermocouple, RTD, 4 to 20, 1 to 5, 0 to 10. There's many different inputs that you can actually have configured into these. You can see below by the unique features of these recorders that they offer a lot of things that are pretty unique in the industry. A couple of the things that I want to point out before we move forward into the software and talking about some of the applications as well is the unique feature that these recorders bring. First of all, the very intuitive, easy to configure menu structure. I've had these recorders with a lot of our new employees, new service technicians, that they sit down with this recorder, and within a day, they can figure out how to go through the configuration by the easy touchscreen navigation, and this is without using a manual either. It's pretty incredible. Each one of the displays, when you go through this configuration, has a question button, and when you click on the question button, it has the entire product manual embedded within the CPU processor of the recorder. So everything you need is right in front of you, and you don't have to worry about downloading a manual and finding additional information on the web. The other unique feature about these recorders is every recorder is fully loaded with all the firmware options. When you buy the recorder, you purchase a certain amount of credits to unlock those firmware options. So later on, if, say for example, you're doing a flow application and you want to have a totalizer built into the firmware, well, you use your credits to unlock it. But let's say later on you want a Modbus master firmware option, you can take those credits and apply them to the Modbus master firmware option. So you can move these credits around in the recorder to unlock certain features, and it makes it very universal, very user-friendly and application-friendly when you're configuring your application. Today's star of the show is going to be the Trend Manager Suite software. So we're going to dive into this software. We're going to talk about the 3 different levels of the software available. That would be the Trend Viewer, Trend Manager Pro, and Trend Server Pro. The reason why these recorders have a special software package available with them is because when the data is recorded on the recorder, it's recorded in an encrypted format. And the only way that you can extract the data, whether it's exporting it to a Excel file or printing out a graph or even just storing it on a server for later retrieval, the only way of doing that is with the Honeywell software that allows you to look at the encrypted data and then store it on a server or a PC. The other software packages that we'll talk just briefly about today is Screen Designer. This allows you to build special bitmap screens or special historical screens on the recorder to make it easier for the operator or easier for other personnel to look at the data and understand what the data is that they're looking at on the recorder. A lot of times customers will take bitmaps of the actual application or the appliance and apply it to the front of that recorder, and then superimpose digital values over the top of it, so that if you have an operator that's operating multiple pieces of machinery, they can very quickly identify on that recorder what they're looking at and what the information means. The software on the far right, the database tool, this is a tool that Honeywell has built to make it easier for you to move the data files between devices, whether it be from a PC to a server, or let's say you were putting in a new server and needed to migrate that data from an old server to a new server. This software allows you to very quickly and easily go into the file structure and be able to move the stored data to other devices. Let's talk a little bit here before we get into the software about some common challenges and applications that customers might deal with. You on this training might be dealing with this in your facilities. Data recording presents several different challenges, especially in the old days when you had well, I call it a pen dragger, where you had a ink pen that was dragging along a chart, or maybe in the real old days, if any of you remember the old Class 15 chart recorders where those were more of a mechanical beast, then that presented a whole nother situation there as far as challenges. But some of the challenges that I think we typically come across when we're doing data recording is accurate, reliable data. You want to make sure that the recording device that you have meets all of the accuracy specifications that the industry is dictating. Whether it be an AMS 2750 spec or some other spec, you want to make sure that the data is accurate and reliable. You want to make sure that the data has a good window into the process, a good visualization. With the new paperless recorders, like I said, you can put bitmaps on the screen to really make it easy to understand the data and visualize the process. And in today's world, when we have multiple different people looking at this data, you like to make something easy to understand and easy to visualize on the front. Back in the previous recorders, when you had a paper style recorder, you just had one format and that was all you had. So those were not very flexible at all. Fast and easy data retrieval for review and reporting. I would say this is the one that I talk to customers about the most, is especially in the quality departments, when they have a customer that might have an issue with a part that was manufactured or heat treated, and they call into you and have you pull the old records. You want to have a system that provides very easy and quick retrieval of that data. Like I said, I always compare it back to the old paper recorders. If a customer called in and wanted that data from a paper recorder, you'd probably have to go out to some file cabinet somewhere and be able to retrieve that data. So fast and easy data retrieval is key. And with the software that I'm going to show you today, I'll show you how quick and easy it is. Documentation for regulatory compliance. This is always a challenge. You have a lot of regulatory out there, EPA, OSHA, you name it. There's a lot of different agencies that want to have that data, and they want to know that you're in compliance. For example, on an incinerator, we are trying to incinerate the bad stuff coming out of the plant through the stack. EPA wants to know that you're at a certain temperature, and if you're not at that temperature, they're probably going to have some questions. So having that data readily available for the regulatory compliance is always a key thing. And then last but not least, secure data with secure access and tamper preventing. So when you get into industries like the food and drug industries, this is pretty key. They want to make sure that nobody can get in and tamper with the data. You know, if you're running at 1,000 degrees and the recorder is recording 1,000 degrees, there has to be things in place within the software and within the recorder that does not allow you to go in and make it 1,001 or 1,002 and override that data. So having a secure software retrieval program as well as a recorder that has all the tampering resistant measures in place is a key thing to have when you're moving forward with looking at new recording devices. We're going to talk real quickly about a couple different applications. You know, typically customers, when they look at recording devices, they're thinking of temperature, but there is a lot of different applications out there. Some of these applications that we're going to move through real quickly here, you probably have in your plants. The first one that we come across quite often is flow monitoring. So any one of these recorders can have a direct input to handle pressure, pulse type metering inputs, flow transmitters. So it can receive a lot of different inputs that can calculate flow, and then also offers a totalization function so that you can see, for example, if you're measuring effluent water coming out of your plant or effluent wastewater coming out of your plant, you can also do the totalization so that when the city comes and asks how much water you were pumping out of your facility last week, you can pull a report pretty quickly and show them what that totalized value was. It also has a lot of math built into it, so you can do square root extraction. Even though most transmitters have that already built into them today, you can offer square root extraction if you have an old analog device that doesn't offer that for your flow. You can do scheduled events to start and stop totalization. You can record by the hour, by the day, by the week, by the month, and actually put those stamps of totalization right on the chart to make it really easy to pull that data and understand what your effluent flow is on a monthly basis or a weekly basis, and capture that data very quickly. A lot of times what customers will do is they'll put a pulse meter or a flow meter on the effluent water coming out of the plant, and then they'll also take their pH meter and also run that pH transmitter signal into the recorder. So now you're capturing pH and flow, which a lot of local jurisdictions want to see both of those coming out of the plant. Next couple applications deal with heat treat type industry. For those of you that are in the heat treat arena, these two slides will probably be near and dear to your heart. The recorders have a universal input, so like I said, you can hook up a direct thermocouple right to the recorder. It does have cold junction compensation on the back of the recorder to give you a very accurate reading. And when I say accurate, this is probably more related to the AMS 2750. So AMS 2750, which is the aerospace standard, does require a certain accuracy for the recorders, being able to read up to a certain digit beyond the decimal point, and I think it goes 2 decimal points that the latest AMS 2750F is requiring. So these recorders are fully capable of adhering to the AMS 2750F requirement. It also has batch recording, which I will show you in the live demo that we're going to do shortly. Batch recording is a very nice way to capture heat treat operations where you're heat treating a batch type operation, and you want to capture that data from the start of the batch to the end of the batch, and then be able to pull up that batch by lot number, operator name, time and date. And this software that the recorder uses makes a very nice and easy way to grab that batch information and be able to analyze it and print it out. The other things that are kind of handy on heat treat operations, probably more so now than it was before COVID, it offers a lot of things that from a remote standpoint. So when I see this little comment here, email alarms or alert personnel of abnormal conditions, I would consider this like a remote indication. So a lot of times you might not have a person right at the process or right at the heat treat oven. That person might be operating several pieces of machinery because we have less people in the plants now. The recorders have the capability to email on alarm. So it can send out to 6 different users email messages based on a lot of different alarm events. It can be start of a batch, the end of a batch. It can be a process variable alarm. It can be access into the recorder. So if somebody tried to gain access and was denied, it can signal a message event tied to an alarm that way. So there's a lot of different things you can do from a remote standpoint, which nowadays that's a pretty critical thing to have. The next heat treat type of operation, we use these a lot in vacuum furnaces. We use these not only to do process variable recording, which would be standard process recording, but we also use it to do temperature uniformity surveys, easy for me to say, for AMS 2750 and for other military standards possibly. Customers want to know that the furnace meets all the uniformity requirements, and they usually put a survey rack inside of these furnaces with up to 9+ thermocouples spread out through the furnace, and then produces a temperature uniformity survey report that shows that the furnace meets all the uniformity standards. I think this is the last application that I just want to pull up real quickly. This is a application on incinerators. We talked a little bit about incineration early on in this presentation here, but the recorders are used widely on these type of operations where you need to prove to the EPA that your incinerator is up to a certain temperature while you are running the process. It offers some math calculations that are near and dear to the incinerators, and that would be the CEM calculations, rolling average. It has a lot of different math calculations to adhere to the EPA standards. One more application here. So we have the food and drug industry. You'll see a little common some verbiage up here that probably if you're in that industry, you'll know exactly what this is. And this is the 21 CFR Part 11 compliance. There is a protocol assembler that Honeywell has made available, and it's a software package that allows you to have a protocol assembler that will assemble a document, and I think it's upwards of about 100 pages. These documents are pretty lengthy, but it documents the serial number, the model number, how the recorder is configured for the particular application, and it saves customers a ton of money when they're going to the 21 CFR Part 11 compliance if they have a recorder that's new, that's being put into a new application. So those of you that deal in that industry, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when these type of 21 CFR Part 11 compliance reports are pulled together. They can get pretty lengthy. It also offers an extended security, which is required by the 21 CFR Part 11, which has multi-user, multi-password, and also a renewal password that is required by the extended security system that's in the recorder. So this is something that's required by the Food and Drug Administration, the companies that partake in that type of industry. All right, so now we're going to dive into the different levels of software. Honeywell has 3 levels of main software that's used to extract the data from the recorder, print it out, export to Excel spreadsheet if you wanted to, and then as well as configure the recorder. So the 3 levels starts at the Trend Viewer software. The Trend Viewer software is a free software package that comes with the recorder, and the only thing that you can do with this software is extract the data from the recorder with a USB memory stick, plug it into your computer, import the data from the USB memory stick, and then you'll see here that you'll actually be able to pull in the graphs. The only thing you can do with this software is print out the graphs. You cannot configure the recorder. You cannot do any online imports of the data. It's basically for viewing the data and printing out the graph. So that is a free software that comes with the recorder, and it allows you some very, very basic features to get started. The next one up is the Trend Manager software. Now, as we step up in these software packages, the next step up will do everything that the previous software does plus more. So you can see on the Trend Manager software, you can archive, print, and export the data. So you can import the data again with a USB memory stick. You can graph the data. You can print the graph data. You can print the event logs and look at the events that happen in the recorder. So for example, if there was an alarm, if there was somebody that calibrated the recorder or accessed the data in the recorder, this event system tracks all of those pieces of information. And when you import the data or export the data out to a software package for viewing, the recorded data, the event data, and everything that's happened within the recorder as far as diagnostics is captured along with that the trend data. So a lot of times customers think that the only thing you get with the recorder looking at the software is just the trend traces, but there's much more that you capture with the data retrieval than just the trends. So we're going to show you that in a little bit here. You can archive the data. So for example, if you bring in trend data and you're viewing it, you can then save the data. You can save it as a date and time. You can save it as a file name. And the nice thing about that is when you save that particular graph of data that you're looking at, it will actually put that data into the file folder that this software resides. So later when you want to retrieve it, all you need to do is click on the graph button and it will pull up all the graphs that you have saved in the past. And then you can just click on that and it'll open it up, and you don't need to go searching for it on your Windows Explorer. It's all embedded right into that software. You can export the data using the CSV format. So when you get your data imported and pulled up on the graph and you get it arranged just as you'd like to see it, you can go ahead and export that data onto an Excel spreadsheet. So then you can build charts if you wanted to. You can do a lot of stuff with an Excel program, obviously, but it gives you the capability to export it to a CSV format. The Trend Manager software also has a batch mode built into it. We will show you that. On my recorder that I have set up here in my training lab, I had run a batch yesterday, so I'll show you how the Trend Manager software is able to pull in a batch. And then last but not least, full recorder configuration. So this is not only a tool for bringing in data and viewing the data, but you can also fully configure the recorder and store those configurations under recorder icon over here on the left-hand side. And then it'll have a list of all your recorders out in the plant. So if you ever get into a situation where you need to make a change to your configuration, or let's say you put in a new recorder, this allows you to very quickly grab a configuration, download it to a USB memory stick, plug it into the recorder, and then upload the new configuration. Last but not least, which is not shown up here, there's a couple different things on Trend Manager, a couple additional things that it offers. The Trend Manager software will also allow you to enable and disable what they call fuzzy logging. And I know it sounds funny, but or might sound fuzzy, but anyways, fuzzy logging is a way for you to be able to store more data on the internal drive of the recorder. It basically saves space when the process is running along at a flat line. Let's say it's running along at 1700 degrees. It's not changing at all. You want to grab fewer data points. But when the process becomes more disturbed and it starts oscillating, you want to grab more points to store onto the data or store onto the hard drive. The fuzzy logging will adapt to those process changes and automatically store more data during process disruptions and less data during flatline type operations. And this basically will give you the capability to expand or record more data on the internal hard drive of the recorder. And you can enable and disable that from the Trend Manager software. Last but not least, there's also a AMS 2750D setup in the Trend Manager. So it will let you set up things such as thermocouple usage, how many times you've used the thermocouple above a certain temperature. It'll give you alarm indications on when those thermocouples need to be changed. It'll also give you the capability to set up the AMS 2750D TUS program as well. So you could use that as a survey recorder and configured with the Trend Manager. The next up is the big brother of the system here. This is the Trend Server. And again, Trend Server will offer everything that the Trend Viewer and Trend Manager offers, with the addition of communications. This is really where the Trend Server has a bright spot, is being able to use multiple different communication languages to talk to, communication hardware to talk to the recorder. So for example, if I had a Trend Server running on a PC and I wanted to run a network connection out to the recorder, now this gives me the capability to import data, export configuration, or upload configurations across the Ethernet connection with TCP/IP, and no longer do I have to go out to the recorder and stick a USB memory stick into the front of the recorder to download data or upload configurations. I can do all of this over the Ethernet network. A lot of customers use this capability. Most plants nowadays have a network connection or a network drop somewhere around the control panel where the recorder is. And if we look back, 15, 20 years ago, that probably wasn't the case. But nowadays, I think, these networks are pretty easily accessible throughout the plant. So if you do drop a network cable down to the recorder is configured with a TCP/IP address. And as long as that address does not conflict with any other addresses on the network, you can actually upload, download data across the network, and it makes it very easy to grab that data. The other way you can communicate to the recorder is through RS-45. So in these applications where you might not have a network drop at the recorder, you can hook up a twisted pair, basically 3 wires that go out to the recorder that are connected to the PC, and you can run up to distances about 1,500 feet. The distances on RS-45 goes much further than Ethernet. I think Ethernet is like 200 to 250 feet before you need a switch or a hub in order to get to another connection. So RS-45 is another way that you can communicate with the trend server software out to the recorders. As I said, you can import data, export data, you can upload configurations, download configurations, all through that. It also offers real-time trending. So say, for example, you had a PC on the network that was in the quality lab, or maybe it was in the room where, the operations take place. You can actually view the data on the PC as it's recording, as if you were standing in front of the recorder out in the plant. So you can capture real-time data at the PC, and it's all at your fingertips. So here's kind of a recapture here on the different levels. Again, we went over most of these here. Couple things that I wanted to expand upon on the trend server software, which again is pretty much the big brother. You can do up to 5 concurrent users. So you can get a 5-user license that allows 5 PCs to be talking to the recorder at the same time, which is a nice feature to have, especially if you have several PCs that want to access that data within the plant. It does have a web browser capability. So from the trend server software allows you to see the front face of the recorder as if you were standing in front of it. The other thing that it offers, which is pretty big for the food, pharmaceutical industry, it gives you an audit trail manager. So, for example, if I was accessing the recorder and I wanted to import the data from the recorder into my PC, one of the events that it logs in the recorder, which is captured with the data, is an audit trail, which shows that I actually went out, I accessed the data, I imported the data with an FTP transfer, and the event system, the audit trail system, will actually log that as an event. So when that data needs to be supplied to somebody, whether it be a regulatory agency or somebody like that, you can show them that the recorder and software has a full audit trail of users that access the data, that import the data, or extract the data from the recorder. And it makes for a very nice report to be able to give to those agencies if they want to see that type of data. A couple other software packages that I had mentioned here just briefly, which is the IQ-OQ protocol assembler. Again, this is for the Food and Drug Administration, customers that are in that industry, pharmaceuticals, food industry. This is for applications where if the recorder is put into a new application, or if it's an application that needs to be audited, this IQ-OQ protocol assembler will actually assemble a report that can then be packaged into the process of putting one of these recorders into the process. TrendView OPC Historian is the next one. This one right here is a way to collect the data over OPC, and it offers a way to collect historical data from the trend manager. And then it's used a standard OPC HDA server. So what this means is if you had a SCADA system that had maybe it's a Wonderware, Involution, Experion, some other SCADA system in your plant, if it has an OPC server, you can actually access the data points out of the trend server software with the OPC. So the TrendView OPC Historian is an option that you can buy with Trend Server in order to give that type of library of data tags or library of data that might want to be exported to a SCADA system. Last but not least, the batch report tool is another add-on option for the Trend Server software that allows you to not only import the batch, but also take a look at setting the golden batch rules so that later on you can overlap a current run or a current batch with the golden batch that you were able to develop. And you can actually, from a quality standpoint, compare the two batches to see if they're within the tolerance of the golden batch. You can include min and max alarms, events, batch descriptors, batch data along with that batch information, and you can then export it to a PDF report that will include all of that batch information. It'll include the username, when the batch started, when it stopped, maybe a lot number, customer name, and then if you wanted to, it can also include the golden batch with the current batch that you're running. So it really brings all of that data into a nice, neat report when you're trying to export it and save it for later retrieval. So before I get into the live demo here, there's two ways that I talked about being able to grab the data from the recorder. So the two ways is, I call them offline and online mode. So the offline mode, as you can see here, there's two removable medias that you can have here with the recorder. One is an SD card. So in the front of the recorders, there's a little drop-down door here, which you can have an SD slot where you can have the removable media that if you're storing data to this SD card, you can then take it to a software like a Trend Manager or Trend Viewer or Trend Server and import that data that you recorded. There's also a way on the front of this recorder here. It does have a USB port on the front, and some of them have the USB port on the back. You can actually plug in a USB key, download the data, or upload or download configurations, and then take that to your Trend Manager, Trend Viewer, or Trend Server software and import the data that way. So that's the first way of doing it. All of the data that is stored down to this SD or USB keys is encrypted. It's secure data, so that when you take it to the PC and you're looking at it with a TrendView software, the TrendView software will be able to unencrypt it and make good use of the data and be able to print it out and put it on a chart and stuff like that. The next way that you can import data or upload, download configurations is with the network connection. So as we said earlier, the Trend Viewer and the Trend Manager are purely offline, which means that you need to have some type of removable data to take that data to the software. The Trend Server software, you can still do that offline type of data migration, or you can do this with the network. And here's a scenario where we have several recorders out on the plant hooked up to a network. Each one has a unique IP address and then connects up to the Trend Server, which could be running on a server, could be running on a PC, but is able to talk to all these real time and gather the data as needed. All right, so what I'm going to do now real quick is we're going to start up the software. This is a live software presentation that I have that's hooked up to a recorder in the training lab that I have here. And just give me a second. Let's see. Roger or Jay, can you see the Trend Server screen that I have pulled up?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through this live demonstration here and run through some of the simple icons that you would be using probably most frequently. When you pull up the software, it'll have these standard icons on the left-hand side. The very top one, it says Graphs. When you click on it, these are all the graphs that you might have saved onto your PC or server, and these might be graphs that you wanted to save so you could view very quickly at a later date. These are all saved here, and this is what I was explaining earlier, is that you don't need to go looking for saved graphs on your PC. when you want to pull them up at a later time. The trend server or the trend viewer or trend manager has the capability to store those folders, store those files on the software so that you can retrieve them very quickly. And this is important, obviously, when you're trying to get customers information. Typically, if they're asking for the information, they probably wanted it yesterday. So this is a real quick way to pull up data for customers. And like I said, you can name it by customer name, lot number, part number, whatever you want to, whatever that naming mechanism is in your facility, you can name those and put them onto this graph. You can also add a new graph from here. So as you bring in data and you import data into the software, it keeps a running total or a running mechanism of all the data that you've exported or imported into the software, over the entire life of the recorder. And if you ever want to go back in and build a graph from an old piece of data, you can actually add new graph and go and build or reconstruct a trend graph. It could be, last year, 2 years, 10 years from now, and you can, as long as it's stored into the PC, you can actually rebuild those graphs. Recorder is the next icon. On the recorder, anytime you import data, whether it be offline or online, the recorder configuration is also brought in to the software. So if I was to double click on this and click open, it has the full configuration of that recorder. One of the reasons why it does this is when you bring in data, the data is attached to the serial number and the ID of the recorder. So the data is compacted into the application or put together in the application that you're calling for out in your plant. So, for example, this one's named Multitrend GR, but it could be easily named Oven 1, Oven 2, or whatever it is. If I ever want to go back and rebuild a graph, this is important because all of that graph data will be consolidated into this application or into this recorder, and it allows for very easy rebuilding of graphs and extraction of data. So it does every time you bring in data, it basically builds this configuration that's in the recorder. If I was to click on any of these icons, you can see that there's additional tabs on the right-hand side that allows me to configure certain items throughout the recorder. So for example, field I/O, these are my analog inputs. These are the types of analog inputs I have configured. The pen data, again, I can attach that to a certain analog input, and this is where I set up my scales, logging, math, stuff like that. But this allows you to fully configure the recorder or make changes to the recorder and then re-download it over the network or using an offline mode like a USB key or a SD card if you wanted to. Real-time communications, that is strictly used for trend server. So that's the next one down on the left-hand side. If you wanted to do real-time data, you would click on this, and then it would actually show you the real-time pens actually as they come in and they're recording into the recorder. The import feature is the next one up on the bottom here on the left-hand side. The import feature is the very first thing that you will configure before you import data. There's two options, as you can see. One's from directory, one is from network. So if you have the trend manager or trend viewer, when you plug the USB memory stick into your PC, you're going to change the directory and where that is coming in at. And then once you find the USB memory stick on your PC, you click import, and then it will import all that data into your trend viewer or trend manager software. The other option, which is only available on the Trend server, is from network. On the Trend server, you're actually going to program in the IP address of the instrument. So this is typically an IP address that your network administrator would give you. They would say, okay, this IP address is available for you on the network. Go and plug it into the recorder. It's a one-time configuration. And then from that point forward, all you need to do is click on the recorder out in the plant and then hit import, and then that will bring in all the data. And we're gonna do a live import here in a couple seconds. But this is the way. This would be the first step that you do in bringing in the data from a recorder, whether it be offline or online. You have a standard help menu, which basically has the entire manual of the Trend Manager software in it, and it has hyperlinks to be able to take you in and out of different areas based on the questions that you have and the what you're looking for. Trash. This is a if I build a graph over here and I decide, you know what, that wasn't quite what I wanted to see on this graph, I can drag that graph down to trash and put it in the trash. Now, when I do that, the only thing I'm doing is putting the view of the graph into the trash and deleting it. The data that is imported from the recorder into the software is never able to be deleted by doing this. All you're doing is basically deleting the view of the data, and it never totally deletes the data from the recorder or from the PC. So you know, that's probably one of the biggest questions I get asked is, you know, well, I pulled it down to the trash by accident. You know, did I lose my data? Nope. You can still build the graph with the same data. This is just deleting the view. The next step is batch. And this is for customers that are running batch type applications. In the recorder, you can start and stop batches. And when you do that, each time you start and stop a batch, it will actually put the batch into the data that's stored on the recorder and then later retrieved from the software. So this is a batch that I ran yesterday. It tells me what device is ID number 1, so recorder number 1, but it could be easily be oven 1, oven 2, or application 1, application 2. It tells me the group. So each one of the analog inputs can be assigned to a group. So if you want to look at certain inputs on your appliance or on your oven and you want to record those into a batch, you can actually group those thermocouples or whatever they might be into a group that runs along with the batch. I gave it a batch name, which was test batch. And then as you can see, it started on April 12th and ended on April 12th. Now, the nice thing about this is that when I bring in the data, it will put all these batches on this file locator. And if I ever want to retrieve that data, all I got to do is double click. And as you can see right behind me here, it put the batch on the chart. And it has a start, it has a finish. And if I wanted to then take a look a little bit closer at the information at the start, this is an event window up here on the top. That means that under this box, I have 6 messages. So if I click on it, it says, I started the batch at this time. I started logging all the pins in group 1. The user ID name was John, user 1234. You can put anything you want in there. The lot number, I put 123. The description of the batch was bar stock, and I put a customer's name in there. Now, if I wanted to print this chart out, I could do that. But let's say I want to have all of these messages also printed out on the chart. Now you can see here, I can put those down at the bottom, and you see a little dotted line with this solid mark here. That tells me exactly at what point of the graph that message was put. Along with it, of course, it has the date and the time and everything else. But if you wanted to do a nice batch graph, you could actually take each one of these messages here and you could align them any way you want. But now you have all of the batch information. You have the start, you have the stop mark. There was some events that took place. These were alarms that I had programmed within the batch. But this gives you a nice report here that you can then go to your print function and you can print out this graph so that you could, send it to a customer on an email or store it, on your server if you wanted to, or store it on your PC. But that's the batch application there, and it makes a very easy, quick way to review that data.
Yeah.
The next is system, and on the system here, this gives you information for setting up your password. It gives you the status. You can set up your email. So if you wanted to have alarms that are triggered on an email to send out to several different users, you can do that. And then also, last but not least, setting up your real time. So let's go back up to recorders here real quick. We're going to just back up real quick to the start. What I want to show you is the very first step that you're going to do when you bring in the software. You bring in data. On this one right here, I actually have an Ethernet cable that's hooked up from my PC to the recorder. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a real simple import of data, and I want to show you how this will look on your PC when you do this across the Ethernet. So first what we're going to do is we're going to say, I want to bring in the data from the network, and this is the IP address of the recorder that I have set up in my training lab here. The next thing I want to do is say import. What the recorder and the PC are doing right now is they're making that connection over the Ethernet link, and the recorder will start allowing the PC here in a couple seconds to start importing the data. First thing it'll ask you is, do you want new data or do you want all data? So if I'm doing imports of data over the network, let's say once a day, twice a day, I don't necessarily want always to go back to the recorder and capture everything on the hard drive. Maybe I just want to capture the data from the last import. This allows it to be a little bit quicker transition. So if I wanted to do new data, I can click on that, and now it establishes connection with the recorder, and it will move through several different steps here to bring in this data. So you see the first thing it did there was ask for the configuration file. So that's where it's bringing in the configuration of the recorder. And now it's requesting the data file. So it's looking at all the data pins that's been recorded, brings it in. And what it first does is it will do build a graph automatically. So you can see over here, it has a lot of data. This is data that I captured from yesterday. I just started recording this yesterday. Everything kind of looks all jumbled up here. So what I typically do is expand the window first. And all of these graphs here, these are the scales of every pen that I have. What makes it nice is that each one of these pens, you can see, will move along with the scale. Now this is pretty unique. Each one of the pens and scales are recorded individually on the recorder. What this allows me to do is that, say for example, I wanted to take pen 1 and pen 2, and I wanted to put them right on top of each other because I wanted to see what the differences were between zone 1 and zone 2 of my oven. This allows me the capability to do that. And the pen data is attached directly to the scale. So you can do a lot of unique stuff with this by moving around this data. But let's get this a little bit more manageable here, and let's go ahead and arrange our scales so that we can see the data a little bit easier. So now we have all of our scales lined up. If I scroll from left to right, we have all the scales right on top of each other, which is fine. The next thing I'm going to do is down below here, this is the timeline. And if I right click, it actually moves me in. If I left click, it moves me out in the data. Now you can still see that this data is very, it's hard to read here. Over on the left-hand side, we have this little clock. If I click on it, I can actually pick a point of data that I want to look at, or I can come down here to go to last, and let's say we want to look at the last 30 minutes of that run. We click on it, hit OK. Now this actually expands it out, and now we're looking at the 30-minute run here, and we have all of our pen data along this graph here. Again, I can still go into this bottom, and let's say I really want to zero in on a particular time. It'll actually go all the way down to 10 milliseconds if I wanted to. And let's say this little point right here, we want to really take a look at it, and we want to see what that point is. If I click on the scale and I can move my cursor left and right, it'll actually show that point of data, and it'll show me the exact value at where these two lines cross to give me a little bit better idea here on what's going on. Let's go ahead and expand back out here. So again, as I move across, you can see at the very top is my time and date. And then as I move from left to right, these values are dynamically changing wherever those two lines cross. So that helps you a little bit better, figure out what's going on there. Let's move out a little bit more here, and let's see if we can capture a couple alarms here. All right. So up at the very top, as I said, not only is the data being imported into the software from the recorder, but as well as all the events and alarms that are triggered during that run as well. Up in the very top is where all my events are laid out. And this run right here says that I have 4 different events that happen right around this time frame. So if I click on it, it'll see that alarm 1 went into and out of alarm several different times. Let's say I want to take a look at these two right here. So you can see now that it will point right to that piece of data where I went into alarm and came out of alarm, and it gives me my timestamp and date, and it gives me a little bit more information on what I need to take a look at. If I wanted to zero in on it again, I can use my left and right mouse button click to really get down to that data and take a look and see what's going on. You can see also as I zero in on that data, these boxes now become separate boxes because I'm actually zooming in on the data, and all of these separate boxes now, which was just a second ago was the box of 4. Now you can see as all these are independent as I zoom in on that data. The other nice thing that you can do is, again, this is just the view of the data. So you can see I'm really manipulating this graph to make it look a little bit more useful to what I'm trying to see here. Let's say, for example, I wanted to make a note on this chart because I see a little bit of an anomaly here in the process. I can actually right-click at the very top, add user text, and I can say, process variable above, above 1,000. And if I click OK, now you'll see that I put this mark here right on the chart. It has a time, date, and stamp. So from a quality standpoint, if I'm really trying to analyze this data and make some useful notes here, I can actually impose a user tag. Now when I save this data, or when I save this graph, this will always be part of that graph. So let's just do that real quick here. I'm going to close this graph, and it's going to say, do you want to save it? I say yes. And now I have this graph, which I can actually rename if I wanted to. And let's just go ahead and rename it test 413. Hit OK. And when I double click on it, now it has the graph that I just programmed. So like I said, this is a very easy way to save a graph, recapture the data, print the data, whatever you need to. But it gives you a lot of flexibility in how you can use this data. You can print this graph if you wanted to, or we talked about earlier, you can actually export it. So if I wanted to export this data, I could say, okay, yeah, there's a lot of data points on here. It's going to take a while. I understand that. These are all the pens. Start export. Where do I want to save it? You know, I can save it to desktop or whatever. Once it saves it, it'll actually bring up a Excel file that has all the individual points of each one of these pens, and it puts it in its individual columns with a timestamp and date. The other thing we can do is at the very top here, again, I'm still in graphs, I'm still manipulating this data. There's a lot of switches that I can turn on and off to be able to be viewed on this. One of the things that's interesting is I can click on point markers. Now, the recorders have the capability of record a point every 10 milliseconds, which is pretty quick. But on this particular one, I think I was recording it once every 10 seconds. So every time it records a piece of data, it puts this point marker. So now if I really wanted to get down to a specific point, I could say, okay, this point right here, yeah, I want to put a message there because that's pretty critical. You know, now it has that marker right where that point of data is. But this gives you a good indication on you know, how often the recorder is configured to record. Each one of these pens can be recorded at a different interval because they're all independent of each other. So this top button here is just to turn on and off switches. I can turn on and off the recorder name. As you can see on the pen scales, it will go back and forth between the recorder name. Thin traces, I only have thin traces on here, so it doesn't matter. Pen type, I can click on that and it gives if it's historical or if it's a real-time pen. Recorder name. So on all the messages or all the events, it'll give the recorder's name and then the date and time. So I can click each one of these on or off. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't affect the graph or the data that's been recorded on it. Let's go back to batch here real quick. Nope, don't want to save that. So again, on batch, I can double click, and this was a batch that I saved earlier. Again, here's all of your events that happen within the batch. This is all the start information of the batch. This is the stop of the batch. So again, it'll give you that stop mark. It'll tell you when the batch stopped. And then again, these are the alarms that I configured in the recorder. And as you zoom in, you'll see that these boxes start breaking apart and giving you the individual alarms as they occurred. So it's a very simple software package. It allows you to import data, upload, download configurations. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this here real quick. And I just have a couple more slides I want to show you before we wrap up. I know I went a little bit over today, but hopefully this information is useful for you. And if you do have some Honeywell paperless recorders, it gives you a little bit more information on the software that is communicating to it. All right. Okay, so I do have a couple slides on here for later reviewing. Basically, they went over the same stuff that I just went over with the live demo. Shows you how to import, how to build graphs, what each one of the icons are in the software. So it moves through all the same stuff that I just went over with you. But what I added here right towards the end is a step-by-step procedure on if you want to build your own graph. So like I said, this is recorded. We're putting it on YouTube. So later on, if you do have the Trend Server or Trend Manager software and you want to build your own graph, this is a quick tutorial on the step-by-step procedures that would take in order to build your own graph. And it walks through each one of the steps there with an arrow pointing to the steps that you need to take in order to do that. So hopefully this is all helpful for you today. Again, I really appreciate your time and patience. And at this point, do we have any questions from the participants? Okay, well, that concludes our training for today. We will have another training session coming up. I will keep all of you posted, and I will let you know the dates and times, and then also I will be sending out a link as I did for this last training session. So thanks for your time, and if you need anything, please give Loy Instrument a call, and we'll be there to help you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for the class, Jeff. Super informative.
Thank you.
Great job, Jeff. Thanks.
Thanks.
See how we did that?
Thanks, Jeff.